feet and a light unto my path. Unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Welcome to Searchlight, a survey through Scripture with Pastor John Corson. It is our desire to bring you a systematic study of the entire Bible, chapter by chapter, book by book. How do you deal with the death of a loved one? It's not a question that we like to consider, but death is a reality that we all must face. We will see this issue today in our verse-by-verse study of Genesis chapter 23. Abraham has been through many tests in his life, and his wife Sarah has been at his side through them all. Now Sarah dies, and Abraham must deal with this intense loss. Let's join John and see how Abraham's test can be helpful and instructive to us today in dealing with the loss of our loved ones. Here now is Pastor John.
Genesis chapter 23. We saw in our last study, Genesis 22, how Abraham was severely tested as he went to Mount Moriah and had his Moriah moment. That is, in chapter 22, the test that Abraham went through was in the offering up of his son. He was ready to plunge a knife through the chest of Isaac to do what the Lord told him to. Take your son, your only son, unto the mountain that I will show thee of, and there offer him as a sacrifice unto me. To get the story, maybe you'll want to pick up the tape because we looked at the whole chapter in our Sunday study. But be that as it may, he was tested in chapter 22 in a big-time way, in the offering up of his son. But now, in chapter 23, the test intensifies, really. For you see, in chapter 22, he was offering up his son, but in chapter 23, he is letting go of his wife. And I believe that in chapter 23, it would prove to be, perhaps, a more severe test for Abraham than what transpired in 22. Offering up his son, 22. Letting go of his wife, 23. For in 23, we will see the death and the burial of Sarah. Why do I say that it's a more intense trial? Because when a child is taken on into eternity, when a child is taken on to heaven, that is, without question, a very real heavy-duty trial. And Abraham was faced with that trial there on Mount Moriah. But the fact of the matter is had he had to go through with that act, which he didn't, you know the story, but had he gone through with it, he would still find consolation and he would still find comfort in the presence of his wonderful woman, his wife, Sarah. When a child is taken to heaven, it is a difficult time without question. And yet, you can look to your spouse and lean on your spouse and draw from your spouse, and the two of you can stand together in those times. Encourage each other. But when a spouse is taken to heaven, it's a trial that is, in my experience, even more intense. For you see, at that time when you desperately need your spouse, she or he is not there. And the nights can be oh so long, and the days can be oh so dark, because the person that you desperately want to talk to and the one who you can really be open with, and the one who has been there previously, at the time when you need that person more than ever, they're not there. And that creates some real unique difficulties. If you have seen a spouse go to heaven, you know that very real drama, that very real dilemma. The very person that you would normally lean on and cry with and look to, that human partner, they're not there. And so you look at your family, your kids, and you find yourself, man, I wish that my mate was here to help me navigate through this treacherous time. Whenever a loved one is taken, don't misunderstand me, there's challenges and difficulties, but in my experience, I have found that as difficult as it is to see a child taken to heaven, it really doesn't compare in some ways with when a spouse is taken on. Both are difficult. And that is why I think here in chapter 23, it would be an even greater trial for Abraham. It's not usually viewed that way. But Abraham, you see, had a remarkable woman that he was married to, a woman that he loved very much, a woman that is held up in the New Testament as a paradigm or a picture for what a godly Christian wife should be. He would miss her greatly. Now, in this story, chapter 23, we're going to see the story divide itself into three movements, three sections. The first movement deals with Abraham's grief, verses 1 through 6. Abraham's grief at the leaving of his wife moving on to her eternal destination. And then the second movement is Sarah's grave, verses 7, 8, and 9. So you have Abraham's grief, 1 through 6. You have Sarah's grave, 7 through 9. And then you have Ephron's gift, verses 10 through 20. Grief, grave, and gift. Interesting, because after my first wife was taken to heaven in 1982, 6 days or 5 days actually after her homecoming, it was Sunday morning, and I addressed the fellowship and gave the morning teaching, and this was the text that I preached from. And so this text has much meaning to me personally. And when I came back around through the Bible again, as I came to chapter 23 this last time through, which was a number of years ago, I found myself unable to teach from the text. And so I just commented on verse 1 and was unable to just really articulate and communicate, as there was too much feeling in it for me, and so I just went on to chapter 24. So I haven't taught through this text in many, many years, except for last night. But the text, I think, has all kinds of practical insight for you who will, if you have not already, dealt with the very real trial of the departure of a loved one, of one that's close to you, one you're linked with. This is an interesting chapter for me, because it has a lot of practical application that was very, very illuminated or very, very impacting in those days immediately following my wife Terry's homecoming to heaven. I think that it would be wise for you, for me, for all of us to think through this passage. It's not a waste of space spending a chapter on a funeral situation, because the fact of the matter is this: the statistics on death are incredible. 10 out of 10 people die. And it's really kind of sobering. It's true, and it's going to be affecting you, loved ones, family members. Unless the rapture happens, which I'm really hoping for and I would be real glad about. But all of us will see people that we're closely linked to departing. Or else we will depart, and the ones we're closely linked to will have to deal with these issues as we move on into eternity. So this is not wasted space. It deals with an issue that every single one of us will deal with or go through at some time or another. So let's take a look and see Abraham's grief, first of all. Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And she died in Kirjath Arba, the same as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham stood up from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying unto him, Hear us, my Lord, thou art a mighty prince among us. In the choice of our sepulchres bury thy dead. None of us shall withhold from thee his sepulchre, but that thou mayest bury thy dead. In other words, wherever you want to bury her would be fine with us. Sarah. Did you know Sarah is the only woman in the entire Bible whose age is given? Now, when you read the scriptures over and over, time after time, you'll get the age of men in genealogies, in stories, all over the place. Men's ages are given constantly. But women's ages are not revealed in the scriptures, except right here in this one situation. Why is that? Well, it could be because the Holy Spirit is a gentleman. And you know that women tend to be a little bit reticent about revealing their age, like the little boy that gets on the bus and his mommy is following right behind him. And those that are 5 or under, they get to ride free. So as the boy makes his way up and his mom is following right behind, the bus driver looks at the little guy and says, How old are you, sonny? And he says, I'm 5, and my mom is 47. And the mother, of course, didn't appreciate that so much. Women tend to not want to readily reveal their age. One young guy I heard about, he was in a real pickle. An attractive, middle-aged widow said to this younger man, I bet you have no idea how old I am. And he looked at her and said, Well, ma'am, he says, I do have an idea. Oh, she says, coyly, tell me. He says, Well, I don't know whether to say 10 years younger than my idea because of your attractiveness, or 10 years older because of your wisdom and intelligence. A good answer. So why is her age revealed here? What's the deal? She's 127. Hey, it's not to embarrass nor to expose, but it's to exalt. That is. This woman, 127 years of age, She was an incredible lady. Why, when she was in her 80s, she was so physically attractive and so beautiful that Abimelech, the king of Gerar, looked at her and said, I want her to be in my harem. And you know, those kings in those days, they were very, very picky about the women that were allowed to be in their harems. They could have any woman in the region. But when he saw Sarah, even when she was in her late 80s, he was smitten by her and impressed with her and drawn to her and said, hey, I want her to be in my harem. So Sarah here is a remarkable woman. She was preserved miraculously. She would be proud of her age being revealed because she would look more like she was, you know, I better watch this very carefully. She would just look like she was at the perfect age that women look. So she wouldn't be embarrassed about this a bit, you see. A remarkable lady, and now she's 127, and she, though, like all people, she moves into eternity. And she dies. And Abraham, we are told at that time, he was in an area called Hebron with his wife in the land of Canaan. How illuminating that phrase is. Abraham and Sarah, when Sarah was taken on into eternity, they were in the area of Hebron. It's not accidental nor incidental that that is given to us. For you see, the name Hebron, as many of you know, literally means in the Hebrew, fellowship. That's what the name Hebron means. In other words, Sarah died in fellowship. She was in fellowship with her husband. They traveled together. Oh, they had some challenges, and we've looked at those in our previous studies. But man, they worked it out and they stayed by each other's side. And they found themselves in fellowship the day that Sarah died. She was in fellowship with her husband. She was in fellowship with her Lord, a godly woman, whom, as I said previously, Peter says, that's the kind of woman that a Christian wife should be. Peter says, study her. Look at her. Learn from her. That's the kind of woman that a Christian wife ought to be, like Sarah. In fellowship with her husband, in fellowship with her Lord. It's a great thing when a person moves on into eternity, being in fellowship. I think of when my first wife, Terry, was taken to heaven. Sunday night, before the Monday morning in which she was taken on into eternity, she was up on stage leading worship, and the meeting was really, really special. It was a Sunday night deal, and if you've been around here Sunday nights, you know that, man, those can be the richest times in our fellowship week in many ways. And she was leading worship that evening, and we stayed up late that night and talked about the blessings that we were enjoying in the fellowship and what God was doing at that time. And what a wonderful thing that the next morning we got up and we're going skiing to Mount Bachelor when my car hit ice and the Lord took her home. But I know that she was truly walking closely with the Lord. She was in fellowship. I think of my daughter Jessica, who the last thing she did before she was taken to heaven, she was here, and you've heard me tell the story many times, but she was here in the sanctuary that morning, having communion, offering prayer. And she walked out the door, and a few minutes later, she was in heaven. What a fabulous thing. That my daughter Jessie didn't die at some high school party where drinking was going on, or some wasted spot, some dumb thing. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to know that those that were linked to me intimately died in Hebron, died in fellowship. Here, Abraham sees his wife depart on into eternity in Hebron. It's illustrative of the way it ought to be. Yet, we read, even though that is so, Sarah died in Hebron, Abraham, verse 2, came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Even though Abraham was a giant of a man, called the friend of God, the father of faith, even though his stature was spectacular spiritually, yet we see here that Abraham was a man who mourned and wept. Bible students, you that take notes on these things, you that are interested in the Word in this kind of a way, make note of this. This is the first mention of weeping or tears in the Bible. God waits until chapter 23 to introduce this concept. And if you've been traveling with us in Bible study, you know the principle of first mention is a real key in understanding the biblical flow of Revelation. And it's curious to me that God does not introduce weeping or tears in the biblical account at the fall of man. It doesn't say that Adam wept or that Eve wept. Or when the flood came, it doesn't say that Noah wept. Or when the Tower of Babel was built and the people were scattered, it doesn't say that tears fell. The Holy Spirit purposefully waits till this moment to introduce that truth. Weeping, tears would happen at a moment when a godly woman was taken to heaven and was separated from a giant of a spiritual man. This is important because there can be those that say, hey, if you're godly, or if your partner or child or whoever died in fellowship in Hebron, so to speak, suck it up, shake it off, and there's no need to shed a tear. Well, God would say in this passage to you and me, it's more than okay to weep at such a time.
Yes, it's okay to cry. The loss is real. The feelings are genuine. And God says that it is okay to express them. It's not a lack of faith in God, but an expression that we see even in Abraham, the father of our faith. This is obviously an important topic, so please be sure to join us on our next program. We will continue to look at Abraham's story to gain biblical understanding on dealing with the death of our loved ones.
This teaching is also available on the Searchlight website at johncorson.com. You will also find on the website Pastor John's books and other Bible study resources. Again, the address of the website is johncorson.com.
For those of you who are desiring a more in-depth personal means of studying the Bible, we would like to suggest the John Corson Application Commentary. There are 3 volumes of the commentary, 2 covering the Old Testament and 1 covering the New Testament. The commentaries are based on John's teachings, so they contain the same insightful and practical Bible studies you hear on the Searchlight radio program. If you would like to order any of these commentaries individually or the entire set, you can do so through the Searchlight website or by giving us a call.
Searchlight is a listener-supported ministry. We appreciate your prayers and support. May the Lord richly bless you.